You don't get praised if it's working great. You only get beat up if it's not working.
Internet is the fourth utility for a long time. You just expect it to be there.
The vision that the founders have is they want networking to become something as ubiquitous and easy to consume as utilities in general. Today, power is not one of your concerns. You're gonna go in, you're gonna flip on a switch, you're gonna have power for your appliances and the equipment that you put on location. There was a time at the end of the 19th century, maybe, when whenever you wanted to electrify a building, you would actually design it from scratch and do everything from the ground up.
Francisco, I have a ton of questions for you. I've really been looking forward to getting this scheduled and talking about Meter for a while now. So thank you very much for joining. And, as a network engineer in recovery, this
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
well, I'm like Cisco console cable CLI only, I've got some issues, right? But as a recovery network engineer, when we talk with enterprises and we look at what's been happening and the evolution of the network stack, right? We had this period of time where, we had let's just say the old, like big logo OEMs that were in space, and you were, based on your skill set, you had different things available to you, and then we saw some entrants, right? And really, I would say like Meraki and the Ubiquities of the world, and then Aruba and Instant On, and then we kind of had this like this little revolution in the LAN, right, of what was actually happening. And now the really exciting stuff is like the birth of SD-WAN, and depending on what you're actually looking for, right, we can get into SD-WAN later, but so there's this kind of like this, it felt like this like iterative step, and then for me it kind of felt like Meter came out of like left field, like all of a sudden it was like Meter landed, and I'd love for you to give like a quick intro to Meter, just to level set this conversation for me.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and that makes sense. That coming out of left field, it comes up in our conversations a lot, because Meter actually was started by the founders like 10 years ago in 2015, but nobody started hearing from us until the 2020s, and probably like closer to 2023, 24 is when we started actually going to market a little bit more aggressively. And that's because when you're trying to disrupt an industry that is as well established as networking, you have to do a lot of research, right? And that's what Anil and Sunil, the founders, spent their time doing since 2015. They started researching who was out there, how to build a networking product from scratch that did something different from what the industry was doing. I think it's good that you mentioned vendors like Meraki and Ubiquity, right? Because I think a lot of the work that Meraki did back in the late 2000s and early 2010s was trying to democratize, to an extent, networking, making it available for anyone, even if you're not an expert like a CCIE, not needing to have console cables to manage your equipment, and introducing something like cloud management to the space. And I actually was at Cisco Meraki for a while, and that drew me in for sure. But then in the last year or so, which is when I've been at Meter, I saw that Meter was trying to take that next step in making networking truly available to anyone, right? The vision that the founders have is that they want networking to become something as ubiquitous and easy to consume as utilities in general. So that's where the name comes from, right? Like Meter is because of like a water meter or an electrical meter. Today, if you're a company and you're moving to a new commercial space, there are a few things that you don't give a lot of thought to, like power is not one of your concerns, because you assume that there's going to be electricity, and you're going to go in, you're going to flip on a switch, you're going to have electricity, you're going to plug in something to an outlet, you have power for your appliances and the equipment that you put on location. There's going to be water when you go to the restroom that you're going to be able to use. those things you don't worry about, right? There was a time, like at the end of the 19th century, maybe, when whenever you wanted to electrify a building, you would actually design it from scratch and do everything from the ground up. But nowadays, we take that for granted. But that's not what it is like with networking. Whenever you move to a net new space, unless you're like very tiny and you literally just need one access point, you're usually redesigning a network from scratch and picking components potentially from different vendors, and you have to make them work together either through your own internal teams that dedicate themselves to IT, or you hire some form of integrator, right? And Meter wants to kind of like make all of that process much easier, right? So we have a vertically integrated stack that includes everything you need, from security appliances, switches, access points, PDUs to deploy on location, software that is purpose built for that hardware, and then we give you an operational suite in the form of a subscription that includes design services, consultation services. It can include physical installation services, and it also includes proactive monitoring. And the other thing that it does is that the customer has a predictable bill that they pay either on a monthly or yearly basis, right? Hence, Meter, right? You know what you're getting into, you know what you're paying for to get the outcome that you need throughout some length of contract, right?
Uh, Meraki Meraki really introduced, like you said, right, this web administered cloud portal, really easy deployment. You plug in a box and it would launch, and it was
Mm-hmm.
successful. Hence why Cisco purchased them, right? Like it really brought in a new approach.
Mm-hmm.
Ubiquity brought this idea of like the solve was, like access points. Why are $1,000 AP down to $100 AP? Not to say the
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 APs aren't better. It's just like, depending on your
Yeah,
use
it's
case.
diminishing returns, right?
Well, it's also like, what do you need, right? Again, like if you're in a 2,000 square foot space, you need one AP. Maybe you don't need hardware antennas with band steering and like handoffs and all these different things, right? So we can there's like this whole other conversation I'm going to try to avoid getting into. But what I'm curious is like, what was the problem that Meter fundamentally was built to solve, right? Because you've talked about it a couple of different things of like vertically integrated hardware and software stack all the way down to PDU, and then also this the idea of deployment management and using an integrator or an MSP and these different things. And so that's kind of like two different problems in some regards. But when from an inception point, and now when you're talking, and when people are looking at Meter, like what is the fundamental base problem? You say that we solve this problem for you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what most companies want is that they want a network that lets them do the work that actually generates them revenue, or that lets them provide value for their
Mhm.
customers or consumers. It could be a non-for-profit, so potentially that too. But the network is, to an extent, a means to an end, right? It should be as easy to do as electricity and water. You just want the lights on. You just want to consume water that is clean. You want a network that is secure, that is performant, and that it's highly available. And then typically, when you deal with the traditional networking vendors, what you're buying is not necessarily a network. You're buying pieces of a network that someone puts together, right? There's no scenario where you come to Meter and you say, hey, I want one AP, or I want one switch, or I want one security appliance. Instead, what we're giving you is basically a white glove approach to networking, where basically we take in an input from you in the form of what is the physical space that you want to cover, and we design a network for you that will go live and that will remain performant, secure, and operational a certain amount of time. We typically guarantee something like 3 nines of availability, but you're never putting together Lego pieces. You're never worrying about what is the refresh for this network going to cost me in 5 years, because you're going to have to do that likely. All of that is bundled into that subscription based model. So you have predictable costs for the lifetime of that network. When it comes time to make it better in the future, you can now just move on to the next generation of hardware that Meter offers, the next generation of software, and you don't have to go and make a big capital expenditure again. And then if your needs change, that subscription is also covering those needs that are changing. For example, a very common example is that our customers might go live with our 1 gig security appliances, right? Because they have less than 1 gig total internet bandwidth. But then 2 years down the road, they upgrade their internet circuits, and now they have something like 5 gigs of combined internet bandwidth. Typically, with a traditional vendor, what this means is that you have to go open up your checkbook and buy a new, bigger, better security appliance. In Meter, the subscription covers that upgrade to the higher capacity security appliance. If in the same space where you have deployed Meter, you're now deploying some new system, like maybe new security cameras or new access control systems that require, I don't know, 20 more ports in the space. Normally, you need to go and buy some additional switches from your traditional networking vendor. In the case of Meter, it's as easy as plugging into an available outlet. You get a new switch that will cover those extra ports. So those kinds of things are all covered, right? You're changing needs, your outcome that you're trying to guarantee. You're never purchasing just boxes from Meter, which is usually the traditional approach, and it's what especially for IT teams that need to do more with less, gives them a lot of headaches because budgeting becomes a nightmare, right? You need to worry about what is the licensing that is actually going to get me the features that I want. In the case of Meter, the base and only subscription includes all of the functionality that the box has today and in 5 years, right?
It's interesting because what Meter has done is build the hardware, build the
Mm-hmm.
software stack, but then also serve as the MSP, the integrator, the VAR. Like there's, depending on what you're interacting with, right? You take that entire stack and you could collapse it into one entity,
Mm-hmm.
and you are presenting it fundamentally different, right? And
Yep.
and the you know uh, it's interesting talking to network engineers now, right? Because the role of the network engineer has changed a lot over the last 10, 5, 10,
Yep.
15 years, right? And nowadays, for the most part, like savvy, experienced network engineers are like, I have to have network at this location, not I want to go out and configure the switch stack, right?
Exactly.
Like it's interesting how
Yeah.
and it's because again, like the value that they're delivering to the organization is not like, oh, I've configured, OSPF and, area 0
Exactly.
and area 1, and I've got like
Exactly.
whatever redundancy, right? It's like, no. When you plug in or you go there, the access points work. Like
Exactly.
that's all the
Yeah.
company really cares about, right?
And
Like,
that's precisely the model, right? Like we are selling you an outcome, a network, not switches, not OSPF, not BGP, not VXLAN, none of that, right? We're offering you a secure, highly available, performant network as part of that model, which is what most people care about, right? So yeah. A good point. One small clarification that I will just make is that while we can offer the entirety of the installation and design processes in many instances, a lot of our business is shifting toward working with integrators and technology services distributors, and they are becoming our primary go-to market strategy. And
mhm.
we can also play with the services that they themselves offer to our and their customers. We just work hand in hand to make sure that the SLA and the outcome is met.
Yeah. What I like about this model is you guys. I think we should talk about this a little bit. What the actual like pricing model is, and
Mm-hmm.
when somebody's actually talking with Meter, because you mentioned this a little bit. Like going and buying boxes. Oh, I need a 48 port switch. Oh, I need 5 48 port switches. Oh, I've got an IDF and an MDF, and extensions and this many APs, and we have to do a Wi-Fi survey, and that changes a lot. Where we're
Yep.
not talking about either purchasing boxes or renting one box. Other vendors and other service providers that are providing let's call it network as a service. I'll just use that term, even though like
Yeah.
there's 3 different things trying to own that term right now.
Yep.
um, you guys approach this very differently. Like it's a very different engagement model in terms of like pre-sales, pricing, what the contract, how walk me through that a little bit in more detail.
Yeah, so the pricing model is probably the easiest part. For an initial budgetary approach, we have a pricing model based on the square footage that we are covering. and we tweak that price per square foot a little bit depending on the specific vertical and the type of space that the customer is going to have. So as a initial budgetary approach, what we take in from the customer is square footage. Maybe we will also take in floor plans. And then based on that square footage, we give you a monthly or yearly fee that includes all of the above. There's really just two real models that Meter works with in terms of like SKUs, so to speak. There's a professional model which accommodates for an integrator to provide their own installation services, and there's the premium model where Meter is basically doing the whole shebang, and it's just slightly more expensive. But that's all the input that we need for doing an initial quote. And then as the sales process moves forward, we fine tune it based on the input that we got from floor plans, from conversations with the customer, doing some form of consultative design. And we fine tune it to the specific vertical, and then we arrive at a final pricing that is still based on square footage. The only thing that has changed is the price per square foot, right? Which usually becomes more attractive the more we know about the customer. But it's very easy to understand what a given location is going to cost you for you as a customer or as an integrator, because very likely a lot of your locations are going to be very similar to one another. And the big change is going to be how many people and what's the square footage difference from those, or the physical size difference between those locations. So as you plan net new locations, you already kind of know what to expect, and you don't have to make these complex spreadsheets with 100 switches cost this, and 2500 APs cost this, and 5 security appliances cost this, and then but I need the license for this one, and I don't need it for this other one, right? It's very predictable, very easy to kind of like understand how to upsize and downsize, right? Because that also happens, right? We have customers that have many sites, but then they need to spin down locations. So they know what that's going to reflect on their bill as they spin down locations and then add new locations in different places. Right? It's a very, very easy to consume type of input. So that's what happens on that front for initial pricing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the consultative process itself, well, there's customers that are very low touch and they really just need a network to go live for 10 locations. They're all pretty similar, cookie cutter. But then even though the offering is quite well tailored to the lean IT side of the spectrum, we also have some really large customers with very fleshed out IT staffs that also benefit from the predictability of our pricing model, but with which we need to do a lot more consultative work just to make sure that everything is going to work to what they expect. This is the case for example, we're working with a pretty large hedge fund company, Bridgewater Associates. They have one of the most sophisticated IT teams that I've worked with in my career, and I've covered the global enterprise space in the last 5 years of my career. Yet they see a lot of benefit for using a model such as Meters that covers most of their needs, and it's very easy to consume as they, as a team, start shifting a lot of their know-how into other areas of their business that drive more value to them, right? Like, for example, managing their cloud environments like Azure and AWS, where a lot of their expertise is shifting towards, right? Whereas as you say, right, if I'm standing up a new office, what I want is that office to have network connectivity and be able to consume my applications, which potentially doesn't require a lot of their own involvement.
What I love about this, like conceptually and thinking it through, is it really shifts the dynamic between IT, the network, and the business a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And as an IT practitioner, what ends up happening to you always is like you get a phone call or an email that says, "Oh, by the way, we signed a lease. We're moving in 30 days. Like, go figure it out." Right.
Yep.
And that turns into this big scramble always of we need structured infrastructure. We need cabling. We need to do a site plan. We now need to buy equipment. Right. And so then you get into the situation where you're like, okay, we need to buy all this gear. And depending on the organization and how many reps you have with this, then you're like fighting for budget. Oh, I need a new firewall. I need a switch. I need an access point. And I love the floor space model and the plan because it really makes this very, very clean like shift of
Hmm.
of perception inside the organization. It's like, oh, the business just signed 15,000 square foot of floor space,
Yeah,
and the network is like a facilities charge, right? Really, you're talking about like you wouldn't, you know, like maybe you're getting janitorial from the building, or you have your own service, or what all these different things are. But like, hey, no, it's 15,000 square feet. Like, this is just what it's going to cost us to have a network here, right? Like, it's
exactly.
not, you know, um, a buddy of mine had the best line ever, and he was a VP of global IT for a company. So, I mean, offices in multiple continents. And he got into a conversation one day, and he was telling me this later, and it was something like somebody complained to him that IT was really expensive. Like, what they were spending for the company was spending on IT was really expensive. And he just kind of looked back at him. He's like, I don't know what you're talking. I don't spend any money. IT is really inexpensive. I spend $0. You have laptops for your teams. That's expensive. I don't spend. That's not my like, I'm not spending
Yeah,
this
yeah,
money. And it was in it like it opened up a new avenue for him with the company, because he really started this process at that point to really educate and push this idea of like, what was the actual budget line items. Like, IT was responsible for acquiring it and deploying it and maintaining it, but it wasn't like, it was like, oh, no, 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 like marketing and sales, you've got job recs out for 200 people, like this is what it's going to cost in addition to the salary to bring them into the organization. And made a much more interesting, I think, like place of of state for IT in the business, and like kind of like everybody working together. So
yeah,
I always
yep.
think back at that. um it's um the there's so many places I want to go with this one. You also you said something really interesting to me, which is like IT value shift. And um and you started off by talking about a little bit about utility of the network, this expectation of like, hey, it's just going to work, power just works. I use this phrase of like, internet is the fourth utility for a long time. Like, you just expect it to be there,
To
right?
be there.
um
And the sad part is that you don't get praised if it's working great.
nope.
You only get beat up if it's not working.
Nope, nobody cares about the power company until the
That's the
power goes
sad
out.
part. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a very similar thing, right? Where it's just it's I think in a lot of cases for IT, the perfect outcome is invisibility, right? Like, nobody notices that it's there.
Yep.
And when
Exactly.
you notice that it's there, then it's because it's a problem usually, and then it's like, you have to deal with that, and you have to rectify it. And that's why this movement, I think, with more sophisticated enterprises, I mean, regardless of the size, but really this move from like, IT is just a pure support function to like a value generation, for the business, has been really, I think, exciting for a lot of IT people as well that are leading the charge in these things.
Yep.
Um, you'd sent me an example here that I want to dig into a little bit, and I think this was interesting also because it was I think an atypical space for a lot of people. This was education, and um, education. I can't think of an industry that's probably more IT constrained in terms of budget allocation than probably
Yep.
the education segment. So, can you like just run me through this really quickly, and let's start from the beginning and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the use case that you're referring to is what we did with Web School, which is a pre-K through 12 school in Tennessee. They're serving something like a little bit over 1,000 students in a relatively large campus, 12 buildings, like 100 acres or so. They deal with the same constraints that everybody is dealing with in the industry in terms of budgeting, but amplified, right? Because
Mhm.
if it's hard for a financial services company to see the value of paying for a network that has some set of specs, like if you take that down to like a school, like nobody's going to see the value of doing that, even though it's critical for the work
Mhm.
that gets done in the school, right? Like there's some work that is still done with pen and paper and books in schools, but a lot of it is now heavily dependent on having internet connectivity. And then this school, well, they hit the usual cycle that you often get trapped into when you're dealing with technology purchases that are usually capex heavy, right? Every 5 7 years you need to go in and refresh the equipment because many things might have happened. One thing could be that the needs of the school have changed. Maybe you need better performance, you need better internet speeds. But the other one is just age, right? Like manufacturers start phasing out support for older gear, and they start hinting you toward moving to the next generation of devices. Otherwise, you risk falling behind, right? And there is never a guarantee that what you paid for back in 2020 is going to be the same that you paid for in 2025 because of these sort of like capex heavy models where you're doing a big expenditure on the switches and the APs and the security appliances, and then maybe you have a somewhat predictable cost when it comes to support and licensing, but the gear itself can be quite unpredictable. And when the team at web school were starting crunching their numbers, they were on a Cisco traditional infrastructure, and they wanted to refresh it to the next generation. Just the hardware upgrade was going to cost them something like 250,000, right? Which was well beyond their capability budget wise, and you weren't even considering things like support for that new environment, right? So that's what led the IT director, Jim, to start looking at other options, and then he started evaluating Meter. And well, the first thing that was very attractive to him was the purchasing model, right? No upfront cost for the school. You can do it on a yearly basis if needed, or if it's better, you can also do it all in one go. With some financial advantage, and it's all inclusive, right? You have all the gear that you're going to need. You don't need to worry about fancy licenses. You're going to have support services integrated, not just break fix support, which like you call in when the Wi-Fi is down, but rather proactive monitoring. And this was also very important for Jim and the school because he was retiring the next year, and he was like the most network savvy person in the team. There was a second person in the staff who was inheriting a lot of this, and he wanted to make sure that when he left a good legacy for the school and they wouldn't be in trouble, right? And coincidentally, that's also another big issue that a lot of companies are dealing with in the relatively short term. I think there's a study out there that by 2030, there's going to be like 25% of network professionals retiring, and not a lot of people are going into networking because they're going into more quote unquote sexy fields like data science or AI and stuff like that. So there's a significant tech debt in terms of personnel there. So he wanted to make sure that as he left, the school was going to be in good hands. And that is part of the promise that Meter was giving them, right? Like we are basically an extension of the customer's team, the integrator's team. And even if your resources are somewhat constrained, you're going to have them enhanced by a dedicated team of Meter support engineers that are going to be watching over your back, right? So, okay, we checked off the box of finances, we check off the box of amplifying the technical capabilities of your staff to an extent, and not having to worry about additional licensing fees and things like that. But then the next time this happens in 5 7 years, and they need to refresh again, this is all covered in the Meter subscription. So there's not going to be any surprise cost in 2030, 2032 when they need to again phase out some of this gear because it's aging. It's already baked into that subscription, and they know what it's going to cost them, right? So yeah, that's where they saw a lot of benefit. Things that surprise them in the process is that whenever you go into a space such as this and you have like an existing Wi-Fi network, let's say you have 100 APs and you go out for a quote for maybe you're switching vendors, right? You're with Cisco and then you're moving to HP. You tell HP, hey, what's 100 APs of this category gonna cost me, right? And they will give you a quote. And most networking vendors out there they're not gonna bat or they're not gonna like stop you there and say like, oh, are you sure it's 100 APs that you need? Many of them might be more consultative and might try to give you a better outcome, etc., etc. But most of them will be content to sell you the 100 access points, right?
Mhm.
In the case of Meter, since we're going to be on the hook for supporting that network, we basically have or are incentivized to make sure that the existing design works, because otherwise we're going to have to be compensating you, right? So we did an assessment of the existing network. We sent people on site. They did the site walkthrough and all that, and we ended up designing the network for 30% more access points total to provide better connectivity in the space, but not just better connectivity, but also redundancy, right? Because we usually design our networks with built-in redundancy so you can tolerate individual component failures. If we go down to the Wi-Fi level, for example, this means that we are first designing for the maximum occupancy of people who could fit in that space by law. And then we take the number of access points that we're going to deploy there, and we salt and pepper them across at least a pair of access layer switches, so that even if you lose an entire access layer switch with all of the APs associated with it, that space is still working from a Wi-Fi perspective. Why? It's not because we're super kind and we love all of our customers and they're awesome and we need to be good to them or anything like that. It's just because we are incentivized to that due to the SLA-based model. Very few companies make money when they're paying their customers, so we don't want to be in the situation of constantly compensating them. And then we design the network to be resilient because of that. And this actually comes up all the time. In the case of web school, one of the things that they also surprised them as they moved on to work with us was that we were opening support tickets for them, and we would be telling them, hey, you have one access point that is down, and they wouldn't know first because we are proactively monitoring the network 24/7, which is something that most IT people are not doing, not because they don't want to, but because they have other stuff to do. And second, they also didn't notice because the network was redundant, right? Losing one AP didn't mean losing network connectivity in the space. It would just mean that we would need to go in and replace that and make sure that it's working again, but it wouldn't impact their operations, right? So both of those things also surprised them, because normally traditional vendors, like they will collect a lot of telemetry on devices, especially the ones that are cloud managed, like Meraki, like Juniper Mist. But what they're watching out for the most part is things like software crashes, device crashes, bugs that they haven't caught in initial testing. But they're not really watching out for the performance of your network, not because they're evil. It's just because they're not incentivized to do so.
Yeah. You said a few things I want to circle back to. The first one is you said like IT director and network team, right? Like this isn't an argument that there were no IT people and it was all like there was no skill set around networking. They were maintaining a network. They had a network. They needed to upgrade the network, right? So there's people and skill set, already in place that decided to go a very different way towards the future, right? And so
Yep.
that's I think this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago of this changing role of a network engineer and IT practitioner around like outcome delivery as opposed to like I'm actually typing and configuring. Like I
Typing
don't think
commands.
anybody now, like listen, I still enjoy configuring routers, but like it's a drag, like it's like it sucks. The other
Yeah.
one I'm going to back into some numbers here because this always stands out to me because you gave me some breadcrumbs here. 1,000 users with a $250,000 capex. So $250 per user in capex. Now, capex is only the first part of the story, right? Because like depending on what you're negotiating, you can just start off at usually a 20% per year per annum support load, right? So at a $250,000 capex, you somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 a year on support and licensing and maintenance going forward. So 5 years on this isn't $250,000 in
No,
expense;
it's
it's
more.
$500,000 in expense. Like, and again, for anybody who's going to send me hate mail, these are very generic numbers. Okay, like
They are. They
don't
are.
get too hung up on this. I'll get to the point. So you still have design, deployment, professional services, implementation, cutover, like all these things above and beyond that number. Now, school is going to be more dense than the average enterprise, but in an average enterprise with 1,000 users, I'm just going to switch to enterprise. Depending on the floor plan, you're allocating 250 to 500 square feet per person in a standard office kind of build out, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, for 1,000 users, you're talking about 250,000 square feet to 500,000 square feet. Again, depending on what you're doing. If you're open floor plan, touchdown workstation, you're going to be on the lower end. If you're traditional legal offices with everybody with wood paneling, you're going to be on the higher end, right? At a high level, not in the case of like web, but like at a high level, for somebody saying, I've got 250,000 square feet with 1,000 employees, and I'm thinking about spending $250,000 to buy hardware. Where does Meter fit into that? What's the contrast?
So you start off with a very similar metric, and then again we can provide you budgetary pricing. It's usually like, and again, I'm I'm
Yeah, no,
not
everything
quoting any.
depends.
Yeah,
The point here is like you have to have a conversation, figure out your specifics and what your floor plan is, and
exactly.
do you have I had a client that for some reason put Mylar, had these had windows in their offices, and they ended up somebody came in and tinted the windows, and they were looked really pretty, except the tint they
Yeah,
used
but
blocked
they
all
attenuate
RF.
RF.
Oh, it was crazy. It was
Classic.
amazing. So the CEO was like, why doesn't my Wi-Fi work in my office anymore? And you're like, wow.
That's crazy. Yeah.
This stuff we get to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that we do with the square footage based model for computing is that assumes like the most dense scenarios, right? Because it's very like 250,000 square feet in a warehouse versus 250,000 square feet in a school or in a corporate campus are very different, right? So
Mhm.
we are leaning toward the more dense environments for the back of the napkin back of the napkin math calculation.
Right.
So we're skewing toward like the enterprise environment and not so much toward the warehouse environment. But then we go in and we fine tune based on the vertical that you're in and any input that we get from you. But we're never gonna design a network for like bare bones coverage, right? Like things that we look at in your floor plans are things like maximum occupancy, right? What like if you were to hold an event in this space, what is the maximum amount of people that the fire marshal would not go in and break down your door for and tell you that you're doing illegal occupancy of this space? And then we typically design for that to accommodate for future growth. Depending on the specific vertical, we will make some concessions, and then we use corrective factors on the maximum number of people. So usually the corrective factor is under one, so it's a fraction of one per person in like 3PL spaces where the density of devices is low, but the physical space is very large. And then when we go into the school, the corporate environment, we're going to have factors that are above one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically skewing toward 2.5 devices per person in that physical space. And that's kind of like how we orient the number of devices that we're going to end up doing. But then we also do an actual survey process. We build out floor plans. We usually use Hamina for this, and we share. That is like one of the deliverables from any interaction with Meter. You're going to have like kind of like the simulation of what you actually get when you sign up with us. And then the other thing that we do that is commonly not done, unfortunately, especially when you're dealing with vendors that have made things so easy that you can often set and forget them. And is that very often like someone will do a site survey, they will design the very minute details of the wireless network configurations that need to go in place when they're dealing with like Meraki or with Mist or something like that. Amazing, it's gonna work perfect, but then you put it in and you leave it to defaults. Happens all the time. It was the bane of my existence as a Cisco Meraki sales engineer, because it was not the fault of the devices. It was just that it didn't, like, the thing that you designed for, you didn't actually implement, right? So we go in and we set the actual required settings on all of the devices. Of course, there's RRM and stuff going on behind the scenes to compensate for variations and stuff like that. But we will set your network to run under some specific constraints that we know are going to be good for you, right? So that's a little bit of the process that goes into all of it. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I mean, I'm laughing when you say like 2.5 devices per person. We had a, a client move into that. I think it was 15,000 square foot floor plate,
Mhm.
and they decided they didn't want to have any wires. Everything was going to be wireless. And at the time when they factored in like test equipment and different things, it was like, you know, we were like 5 devices per person on average, and then you
Yeah.
start doing like the multiple up, and you're like, well, and you're like, I don't think you. It was like, trying to be like, this isn't going to work the way you think it's going to work.
Yeah.
Like, because you don't have wires at your house
Yep.
and there's 2 people there, and you've got all your whatever TVs and everything, and your Xbox and PlayStation, whatever, and stuff. You've got like, 25 devices on your home wireless. Like, you really haven't really thought this through, that you're going to have 100 people with 4 devices each
Yeah.
in this space, and then be like, oh yeah, no, that works great. Oh, by the way, we also want to do real-time voice and video, like, and
On top of all of that, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's the other thing that goes into the design process, right? We generally assume that you're going to run Zoom or Microsoft Teams on your
yeah,
network, so we usually design for like minus 65 dBm primary signal strength and minus 67, which for secondary signal strength, so that even like first it facilitates roaming to always have 2 good options close to you. But then second, it also makes sure that even if you lose the access point that you're connected to, because there's a failure, power outage, whatever, or a cable gets cut, you can always associate to another AP in the same area without you moving and still have voice quality, right? So those are some of the kind of like cookie cutter stuff that go into our designs, even if the customer is not asking for it, right? There, oftentimes you as a sales engineer working for whoever you want to work, you will always run into a customer who underestimates their own needs because they think that that's gonna be a little bit better for them budget wise, and
it's
I
never
get it.
happened.
Yeah, and I get it why they think that, right? Because it's a big expenditure, right? And again, I think that's why what Meter is trying to do is transformative for those types of scenarios. I have every time I have a conversation with a customer today, I have to tell you, hey, don't worry, like we don't really mind if we give you more APs or if we give you more switches than what you're requesting. It won't change your subscription cost. Like your subscription cost is based on the physical space that we're covering, and that's basically it. So yeah, we don't have to piecemeal this, right? If you need 100 APs, it's fine. If you need 120, it's fine. It's gonna cost you that, and people find it very hard to believe. But yeah, the I think especially for the layperson or people who work in IT but have never worked on the vendor side, one of the most expensive things for a vendor to deal with is not really the number of boxes that they give you. It's supporting the super old ones, right? Like usually any one vendor has like n+2 generations of hardware in the field, right? So the current one, the one that is like bleeding edge, and the one before that. So you're supporting like 3 likely different code bases through that process, and you stretch that for a very long number of years. So the life cycle of a given product in the market is something like 12 years total from when you released it to when you actually take it out. In the case of Meter, what we're trying to do to reduce costs on that front is that we are aiming for n+1, so the current generation and the previous one right after that. And we don't envision any of our customers running any one of our generations of hardware for much more than 5 years, which makes things exceptionally easy for us in terms of maintaining code bases, because as we roll out a new generation of software, we could re-architect the code base for that new generation of hardware and not have to worry about what the previous generation, the previous 2 generations were doing, right? And that cuts on support costs by a lot. And then we can transfer those into being a little bit more efficient for our customers, right? Which again, in the case of web school, they were blown away by the price difference between what they were getting before with what they were getting with Meter.
Really common now is a we talked about this earlier, like multiple different manufacturers being
Mm.
deployed on a network, and a lot of times that shows up as there's a manufacturer providing the layer 2 and access point, so the physical layer, even though access point's not physical, but providing the switching layer,
Mhm.
the wireless layer, and then another manufacturer that's been deployed for the firewall, for the SD-WAN, and then you get into whether or not the enterprise is moving into, a SASE deployment, ZTNA is coming in. How um, in those cases where we start talking about enterprises that have already made a significant investment in their security edge, right? Pick a manufacturer, who cares, right? Or maybe it's SSE, maybe they've already gone SASE.
Yep.
What's the meter viewpoint of this and deployment and support?
So all of that is very fair, right? And it happens especially with companies that have less constraints on budget and on personnel. They very often try to go for what they call best of breed, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
choose like the best vendor that you find in the industry, usually the ones in the top right of the Gartner quadrant or whatever, for wireless, and then the same for switching, and then the same for SD-WAN or security. And they build these more sort of complex architectures. Sometimes they can afford it because they have small armies of people who can automate stuff at scale. But at the end of the day, it does result in unseen costs for them, because supporting that whole thing, even if the individual vendors are amazing, it's going to introduce more complexity, right? So we are sort of opinionated on that front, and we try to steer customers in general into the direction of the full stack and seeing the benefits of having a vertically integrated approach. That said, we have some ways to work around that or with that. So the first way, to try to make it a financial discussion. And this is something that also played out in the case of Web School and with many of our other customers. We have a buyback program in which we will recognize the existing investment that you have in other vendors, and we will pay fair market value for that, and treat it as a credit to your subscription. So it ends up reducing the cost of what you're paying us in general, and then we recycle that gear and all that. So that's one approach, and for many customers, that's good enough, right? Because a lot of times it's mainly a discussion around sunk cost, right? I already invested myself in this vendor, or I refreshed my switches last year. I'm just looking for new security appliances and access points. So that helps a lot in those conversations, and a lot of customers see a lot of value in that, right? Because they are able to recoup some of those investments that they already made while maintaining vertical integration across their stack. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is okay, the customer has some security or SD-WAN solution that they really love, or that they are on the hook for a contract that they cannot or do not want to walk away from, right? In those instances, we can accommodate that, and we have done it. And what we typically do is that we put our meter stack, including the security appliance, behind what they already have, and we set our security appliance in transparent mode just to provide monitoring services for our gear. But it's not in the actual data plane path of what's going out of their network, and we disable security functionality so that there's no funky stuff going on, and they go out through their existing SD-WAN slash security stacks. Very common for customers that might be on managed services contracts with Fortinet or Palo Alto. It's not our go-to. It's not ideal for us because it introduces complexity when it comes to the SLA. Because if there's an outage in a given location, whose fault is it? Is it Fortinet's, or is it meters, right? Or Palo Alto's or meters? So it makes things harder for us on that front, but we will accommodate that when needed. Especially if it's the right thing for that particular customer. But generally speaking, we'll try to be opinionated and try to steer them into the full stack, and try to leverage things like buybacks to help them do what they want to achieve. There are also some other scenarios where maybe there's a feature that we haven't deployed into our switches or into our security appliances, and we will work around those or try to accommodate those. And if absolutely needed, we will incorporate third-party equipment in there. Now, when it comes to things that Meter doesn't provide at all, right? Like right now, the security services that we provide are on the network itself. We don't offer a cloud security solution, for example, or an endpoint security solution. We actually encourage you to have that, right? So if you're working with CrowdStrike on your endpoint security, or you're using, I don't know, Prisma or Zscaler or something like that for your cloud security, that's fair game. We will extend your network into those environments using traditional networking solutions like IPsec and BGP, and we will send you telemetry from our devices, so that if you have like an XDR solution, you can use that into your decision making process. We can stream telemetry using things like Kinesis data streams, or we can also use webhooks for any of the common security platforms out there, and we'll work with them. That's fine. That's not something that works against our vertical integration in any way. And you as a customer and as an integrator, you should make sure that your customer has some form of defense in depth approach, especially when it comes to security solutions.
The sophistication of the network, size of the enterprise is a proxy for sophistication a lot of times, right? Just as companies get larger, they require more sophistication. Mm-hmm. It's usually driven also by compliance. The hype cycle around SSE and then SASE, or SSE, SD-WAN, SASE. SD-WAN cracks me up.
All of the acronyms.
Well, SD-WAN cracks me up because it's like, what percentage of deployed SD-WAN is just people that are just looking for a VPN solution, like an automatically configured VPN? And I know it's a really high number because I've configured Cisco VPN on, PIX 501s, right? Even having expertise in that, you're like, oh, it's working, but I don't know why, right? Like, don't breathe on it too hard. But when you get into the security space and you start looking at it and you say, okay, a big driver that I see in SASE, right? So SASE is this like omni umbrella of everything, but usually it's remote work, remote access, ZTNA, so the real zero trust. But a lot of that also becomes driven around like access control, resource control, and audit. Do we have an audit path, and can we take data out of this platform and then put it into a SIM, and then use that as a control, for CMMC or SOC 2 or whatever other compliance we have to maintain. Mm-hmm. And you talk about streaming data to Kinesis. That's great because people are going to need, it's like network access control. Like, can you plug a new device into a network port? The average small SMB, small mid-market company probably isn't thinking about that. But you cross a certain line, you're like, no, we have an IT security policy that says you can't just come in and like plug something into the network on the wall, right? Like, a bank probably doesn't want that to happen,
Not at all.
So then, I'm not going to go down the list of this, but event log, and you say XDR, so in my head that immediately triggers off like, oh, you can integrate and send data to somebody's SIM platform, and then they can see it and maybe not, take and do corrective actions against it, but at least see it and alert on it and come back and say, there's something going on here we need to look at. I'm going through my notes here.
Yeah. I mean, and we support a lot of those use cases. Again, sending telemetry to SIEMs is something that happens very often whenever we're dealing with larger enterprise companies. And then behind the scenes, everything that happens in the meter dashboard and to meter devices is controlled by a GraphQL API. And we are fleshing out a lot of those integrations so that you can actually have some level of closed loop automation from external sources, right? So if we send you an event and then your platform wants to turn down a switch port or something like that, or try to enable a firewall rule, those are things that we're going that direction as well. So as to play better with a lot of the security ecosystems out there.
How large can you scale a single site? What's the, there is a limit to how far you can stack an access switch, right? And this is what pushes most people into chassis-based infrastructure, just because they have port density. So how give me the, book in the sizes, a company that's a retail organization that's got 2,000 locations, with small, 2,000 square foot, sites at aggregate is probably interesting to meter, but a single, how small will you go on a single location, and on the other side, what's the upward scale?
Yeah, I mean, smallest. I mean, we have like for distributed enterprise, for customers that have like literally little stands in a shopping mall or whatever. Mm-hmm. We can have something like a security appliance, a switch, and a meter access point, and you're done, and that's it. It is not too cost effective. Is that if that's all you want to do, it becomes cost effective if you have hundreds of those, and then
Mhm.
okay, we'll do something for the aggregate square footage that you're doing, and we're gonna give you some pretty attractive pricing there. But if it's literally just one site that needs one AP, it's very likely that Meter is not going to be a good fit in and of itself unless there's others. In terms of scaling up, so we've done well in medium size campuses where you might have beyond 500 access points. That is not a limit for us. Like it's not like, oh, 500 APs. That's the most that Meter can do. Not really, but that's around the largest that we have deployed so far.
It's a lot
I
of
think
that's a lot of square
that
footage.
that's pretty big, right?
Yeah.
I think in the specific case for web school, like 100 acres, they have something like 400-ish access points or so, and over 100 switches. So it's largish. And we are starting to make inroads into really big physical spaces like higher ed. So we're not too concerned about scale on that front. One thing that right now we don't advertise ourselves to be something that you can truly scale out in massive environments like the data center space, right?
Mhm.
Like data center space is not something that we're tackling today, but we are planning to enter that market. I mean, if you've seen anything around like the last funding round that we did with General Catalyst, there's some mentions of what we're trying to build in the data center space, likely starting next year. But that's not something that we go into today.
Mhm.
For the most part, so yeah, distributed enterprise, fine. Mid-sized campuses, it's pretty good. We're doing great with third-party logistics companies that have huge warehouse spaces, because again, a lot of what makes that business tick is have as many revenue driving people on site and not so many like IT personnel on site,
Mhm.
and they want an always on network with robots zipping around the entirety of the footprint of the space. For example, we're working with a pretty high tech 3PL provider called GoBolt that really like that about us, and we're doing pretty well with a lot of really large 3PL providers that right now I cannot mention,
Yeah.
but
If
yeah,
you've got a warehouse and you're shipping product and you've got a barcode scanner that needs to be on Wi-Fi in
it
order to
needs
work, in
Wi-Fi.
order to pull, network really matters to you. And maybe you don't realize the network really matters to you until the first time the network goes down, and then you realize how much network really matters to you. Like that's
Yep. Yep.
that remedies um, that remedies really quickly. Uh, I want to go backwards for a second because you talk about like
Yep.
trying to get everything, like really pushing for vertically integrated stacks within the security appliance. What are the options for redundancy? Because we start talking about like data center, that opens up like a whole nother like can
Yeah.
of worms in
Another
terms of
can of
protocol
worms.
you need to support. And and it's not common, but like some enterprises need BGP
Mm-hmm.
because of what the redundancy strategy is. Some enterprises are just using SD-WAN. Some enterprises are using some sort of cloud gateway with the SD-WAN or with a SASE appliance in order, like there's a pretty good amount of variety there. But in general, um, what are the like go to market approaches or preferred cases for internet resiliency?
Yep. Let's start perhaps at the local level, right? Let's think about the security appliance itself. We can have multiple internet uplinks in our security appliance and use all of them together. So if you have two, three, four ISPs in a given location, that's fair game. You can fire off out of all of them at the same time, do load balancing. You can do policy-based routing and point certain applications or certain types of user traffic out of certain uplinks with certain shaping characteristics. So on that front, there's very few constraints. The security appliances that we go to market with out of box have two dedicated ISP quote unquote ports, and then you can turn any of the other LAN ports into additional ports, right? Just literally a toggle in the GUI, and there's no real difference in the performance of the LAN ports versus the one ports at that point. They just become another routed port in the security appliance. And then for local high availability, in the case of that security appliance failing, we can cluster them in pairs right now, but we're looking to expand that further in the short term. Right now, you can deploy them in pairs of highly available security appliances. That is like for any, we basically operate with like t-shirt sizes for locations, so to speak, where you have like extra small, small, medium, large, x large. For anything that is medium and higher, we include redundancy of the security appliance by default. You don't have to pay extra for it. If you want that kind of redundancy on smaller deployments like S or XS, like maybe you have a literally like a little shop in a mall where you, for whatever reason, want to have high availability, we can include that into the contract, but that drives up the pricing just a little bit because it's not cost effective at that point in time. And then when it comes to resiliency across locations, you can extend your network. If you have all meter deployment, we have basically a VPN orchestration technology like many other vendors that creates an SD-WAN overlay. And you can bunch up thousands of meter security appliances in that process. I don't know that we are deployed in any space in any one customer that is doing that for multiple thousands, but we have stress tested it in our lab, and we've scaled to over 10,000 tunnels in a single security appliance, and it does pretty well, which I think fits a lot of the use cases out there. And then over the tunnels, you can have active standby or active active and all those kinds of flavors. And right now we are in the process of incorporating that with BGP in IPsec for third-party tunnels. So that likely will get released during the fall this year. But yeah, so quite a few options when it comes to redundancy. Anywhere where you want to take that?
Um, yeah, so let's just beat the SD-WAN horse to death here. In my world, like real SD-WAN, like there was like the pseudo SD-WAN, which was internet resiliency, right? Multiple uplink, you're doing double NAT traversal kind of load sharing between multiple things, right? Outbound,
Yep.
not inbound. Then for me, like real SD-WAN starts, which was MPLS replacement of this, a creation of a private network, underlay, overlay. Where is the appliance in line? I mean, there's all these other network decisions that get played into place, right? And then from there you get into like inbound resiliency, right? So you've got typically voice. You've got some kind of application where you can't have now boundary change, and you want to be able to have protected QoS coming back inbound. So that way you could say this application is going to work, and this application is going to work less, right? Or the extreme examples, we have a gas station in the middle of the desert, and if the primary internet goes down, we fail over to the satellite link, make sure the point of sale terminal works and nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these again, like this is all like really specific to that enterprise deployment. Do
Yep.
they already have something on place? Do they want to keep it? That's not like a there's no one size fits all like approaches with this stuff, right?
No.
There's I mean, I could ask, we could probably spend an hour talking about each one, and I don't think that really serves the purpose of what I'm trying to get to here. A lot of motion right now in the network world. We've got this HP Juniper thing going on, right? Which still hasn't played out. We don't know what comes out of that. Are they going to maintain multiple product lines? Are they not? Cisco's got multiple product lines. We've got residential gear that's starting to come up stack. You've got Ubiquiti that's done phenomenally well in penetrating the enterprise.
Yep.
Excellent cost. Value performance for an engineer, an IT director who's looking and staring down an ultimate network refresh or a new project, right? Like you've been on all different sides of this. You've seen this with from different places. What would you tell them to like really stop and think about and like before they like dive back into or just continue forward with a refresh with the existing vendor? Like what's the 30-second like, hey, take a heartbeat and look, come talk to Meter.
Yeah. One thing that I did learn from my Cisco years was the qualification process using MEDPIC, and the more important thing to do to drive a sale is implicating pain. So yeah, I would try to translate some of the common pain points that I think that person has. Unpredictable budgeting, reducing or shrinking resources when it comes to like IT personnel and expertise, um, and the ability to have someone watching over your network 24/7, all included in a single subscription that covers the majority of your um, site to site and campus location needs. And that would likely open the door to a conversation, right? Because the unpredictability of budgeting is something that most vendors have not been able to solve, not because they don't want to, but because they're the fact that they're publicly traded enterprises that have to meet certain um, uh, forecasting expectations and all that doesn't let them move too fast on that front. And then uh, most of them are not bundling in proactive support because it's hard for them because of the size of their infrastructure and the number of generations of devices that they need to support. And they lack vertical integration because of a lot of the things that you mentioned, right? Like, okay, Cisco Meraki, great. They have full stack networking products, but then as they get acquired into Cisco, they need to start integrating into the rest of the Cisco ecosystem. Now you have things like incorporating Catalyst switches into the Meraki dashboard, which is a process, right? And it wasn't an easy process for them. And I think HPE and Juniper are going to run into the same thing unless someone from the top says like, we're going to do this and you're going to eat it.
Well,
So yeah,
that's kind of the best case scenario outcome in some regards for, HP Juniper is just somebody deciding like this is our product line going forward and the other product line is dead, right?
yep,
Now, the chances of that happening are very low. I
yep,
mean, Cisco's maintaining how many different SD-WAN appliance, like technologies at this point, right? Like
yeah, a few.
it's, I mean, this will date the recording for, the future, but like, to your point, Fortinet on their earnings call, got slammed afterwards because and the key item there was the refresh cycle for their firewalls.
Yep,
Like these companies are forecasting how what percentage of deployed equipment is getting refreshed at what pace and where they are through that cohort of replacement
exactly.
and the replacement rate. And the it wasn't a rosy picture for them in this earnings call, like it.
Yep,
And that's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of friction also with legacy manufacturers because if you're used to the revenue of selling a capex with support and then a refresh model, and now you've got pressure coming from SSE and SASE where you have to figure out how to migrate your on-premise firewalls to a SASE platform without cannibalizing. It's a big mess for a lot of these
yeah,
companies.
it's tough, right? Because you have, especially as you scale out to those sizes, you end up having business entities that basically become their own small companies, and they all have their own expectations of what needs to be done. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's a very hard problem to have. I think it's probably a kind of good problem to
Yeah,
have,
I
right?
mean, you're
Like
talking
if
about
I get
we're talking
if
about
you talk,
multi-billion-dollar problems here. Let's be
if
real,
you
but
if you talk to me in 10 years and meter has gone to a fraction of that problem, I will probably be very happy at that point. But yeah.
yeah, it's well, I mean, not allowing. I mean, controlling the refresh cycle is going to help you guys a lot.
Yep.
You know, like
Yeah, because
just
we don't have to work like what we are expecting to get from the customer is not a PO for a bunch of new boxes. It's, hey, let's continue the service or not,
yeah.
and that's it.
Well, I mean, what's the penetration of Wi-Fi 7 clients at this point in the enterprise? I mean, very small. I mean,
Yeah, small.
we're probably talking about like the next major, like phone tablets, laptop refresh before Wi-Fi 7 is really even that prevalent.
Yep.
And we're going to have 5 years before Wi-Fi 8 is prevalent, right? Like it's not, so like there's, I
Yeah,
don't know.
that's another area where we are somewhat conservative, right? Like jumping into new trends, like we weren't the first to go to market with Wi-Fi 7 access points, and we're gonna start offering them before the end of this year, um, uh, because again, as you're saying, it's not necessarily a need that is out there for every single device that exists, but it's something that is going to become a problem. But to that point, one thing that our customers don't necessarily have to worry about is about their changing needs not being met by what they have right now. Because if we have a customer today with our Wi-Fi 6 APs, and then they hit critical mass of 6 gigahertz devices in between their refresh cycles, right? In the next year or two, and then maybe the refresh cycle, quote unquote, happens in 5 years. The meter subscription adapts to their needs, and we upgrade their existing APs to Wi-Fi 7. Uh, we don't really. That is not something that we are too concerned with, because that's not how we make money with the boxes. It's by having you pay for this service that gives you all inclusive network support and the full stack of devices that will support your needs, right? So that is one thing that I think several of our customers are finding valuable, because oftentimes when you do a net new technology purchase with a traditional vendor, beyond thinking about the next refresh cycle, you're also thinking, all right, if I don't buy this M gig switch today, that I don't actually need today, if I need it in 3 years and I tell my boss that I need money to buy it, whose head's gonna roll, right? So you end up
Over
buying
provisioning.
something that you are not sure that you're gonna need, and you over provision, and then you end up spending more money there. Yeah, we want to give customers an out from that. So hey, you get the network that you need today, but it's future proofed. And then if you end up changing needs in 2 years, we have you covered, right? You get the M gig switch, you get the Wi-Fi 7 AP, you get the 50 gig security appliance if needed, and so on and so forth. So don't make your purchasing decisions necessarily thinking about the unpredictability. We're gonna have you covered, regardless of how those needs change.
Awesome. Francisco, thank you very much. I could go on and on and on in the network world, but I really appreciate the time. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, no, great, great having this conversation. It was pretty awesome.